Welcome back, folks. This is our afternoon meeting of the Joint Justice Oversight Committee. It is Tuesday, July 12th. We're continuing our testimony this afternoon on the bill that passed this past session, SB 224, and this deals with juvenile proceedings, and we're looking at the preliminary report that the administration has submitted to us, describing the progress towards the completion of that plan and looking at placements of juveniles in the justice system, ages 12 to 17, and then also folks under raise the age of 18 and above in terms of their placement. So there will be a final report submitted to the legislature by December 1st of this year, so that hopefully we have some direction from the administration how we move forward, particularly in light of a case with the state versus Beckett for a facility in Newberry. We don't know how that case will be resolved, but we need to figure out how we move forward. So with that, I will turn it over to, I'm assuming it would be the Deputy Commissioner of DCF. Your Honor, you're here. So I'll turn it over to you, and if you could just introduce yourself for the record.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Erica Radke, and I'm Deputy Commissioner of the Family Services Division of DCF. General Counsel Jennifer Micah and Adolescent Services Unit Director Tyler Allen are also here with me, and we're really happy to be able to discuss DCF's preliminary report per Act 160 with regard to a plan for secure placements for justice-involved youths and emerging adults. I'd like to start with just by mentioning that DCF is committed to providing a system of care that's really responsive to the unique needs of those in our care and custody, including having treatment programs that are holistic, trauma-informed, and also developmentally appropriate and located within the state whenever possible. And as you know, the pandemic has caused a great deal of stress on our system of care, such that statewide program capacity is currently running at only 64% of licensed capacity. And that reduction in numbers in trained and skilled workforce has had a cascade effect, really negatively impacting all of our levels of our system of care, not only from community-based care and foster care, but also the residential treatment facilities, either secure or otherwise. And in response to that, DCF has really made a concerted effort to try to stabilize our system of care, including providing substantial emergency relief funding to residential programs in the state, increasing ongoing rates for programs and service providers, and also providing and funding healthcare traveling staff to fortify those critical residential and stabilization programs in Vermont. And we believe we invested a great deal of money in those efforts. And without that investment, we believe we would have even further erosion of our system of care at this point. In terms of plans for secure residential placements, we have two primary initiatives in development already. As you know, the program in Newberry that was mentioned earlier, it's now called the Summit Transition House. It's been in development for some time. The program is going to be a secure, trauma-informed, 6-bed, short-term stabilization program. We are currently in litigation before the Vermont Superior Court, challenging the town of Newberry's denial of the zoning application for the program. The briefs have been filed by both parties with respect to summary judgment, and the case is now in advisement before the court. So as it is in litigation, that's pretty much I have to keep my comments limited to that, but it is pending before the judge at this point. Another exciting project we have under development is in Windham County. We've been working with the Sheriff's Department there to develop a dual use program. The first program will be non-licensed and have one bed, staffed by sheriff's personnel, as well as one of our own family services workers. And this is primarily for very, very short-term stabilization, pending placement for the youth. And then the second program is more traditional. It'll be licensed by our residential licensing and special investigations unit, and it'll be a 2-bed program run by one of our provider network members. And the focus of this program is for treatment and stabilization for youths in acute mental health crisis. And we are anticipating, there's been some delays with construction, but we're very hopeful to have this program up by the end of summer. And so in addition to those two programs that are already under development, we do believe we need additional beds for secure placement for youth and emerging adults in Vermont. And we're working really closely with the Department of Corrections, as well as members of the Juvenile Jurisdiction Stakeholders Group, to formulate a plan per Act 160 for these placements. And what we're doing is it's important to us to seek input from those with lived experience, provider networks, as well as BGS, in order to make sure that the programs that we design not only reflect our values as a department, but really truly address the needs of those youth that we serve in order to give them the best chance possible at a productive and law-abiding future. So that's sort of a brief overview of the report. And I know we'd all be really happy to answer any questions you might have at this point.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Deputy Commissioner Radke, thank you very much for the summary. I kind of like to go over a couple of the points.
Sure.
Page 2, do we still have healthcare traveling staff?
We do have traveling staff, not at a particular program in Bennington, but we're using them to help serve the needs of another youth that we have in our custody.
I'm going to put this delicately, but the Newberry plan, we started out on this on, I think, according to an email from somebody in Newberry, Representative Pugh and I signed off on a letter on November 16th, 2020. So that's almost a year and a half ago. Before you came to Vermont, I'll point out. And, you're not to blame for that letter. But I'm going to be blunt. What makes us think that we're ever going to have a program at Newberry and we're putting so much reliance on that program to solve many of our problems when there's a number of other points about that, but when the former Secretary of the Agency of Human Services first proposed this, it was going to be covered by Medicaid funds. And that's not going to be the case. So I'm wondering if we're not fighting something that just ain't going to happen and putting ourselves at further risk within the system. And I will stop there and I have other questions about the Windham facility if you want to comment on my bluntness about Newberry.
I appreciate that question, and I absolutely understand your perspective. And I think that was one of the motivating factors for trying to stand up what we're calling an interim facility in Windham because of the delay with the Newberry project. So we absolutely are continuing to look for additional plans, just in case things don't go through. But also in terms of looking at the Newberry facility, people have asked me, well, do you feel hopeful? I mean, you know, I was a judge. You can never tell what a judge is going to do. They do what they want to do. But in looking at the case as a whole and listening to our attorneys, I am hopeful. So I don't think we should throw in the towel yet with Newberry. However, I think we should be smart and continue to make plans just in case things don't go as the way we believe they are. And that was a large part in starting the project in Wyndham.
Yeah, that's 3 beds, and I'm assuming that still leaves you 3 beds shy at least if you think you need 6, but I'm thinking you probably need 9 to 12 at any rate. But that's just my, let me ask you about Wyndham. That I thought was gonna come on much sooner and it's still delayed. I was aware of a problem. We have a similar to the non-licensed space in Bennington where the sheriffs sit with kids. My understanding is over the weekend, there was a kid who needed that, got approved by DCF and they couldn't find a sheriff. Deputy to sit with them. So there's, you know, that scares me when we're relying on that for one of these more difficult cases. Does that kid end up in one of the correctional facilities? I'm just worried that we're not prepared for the onslaught that comes after Labor Day, by the way. And my experience is that once summer's over, you start to get a lot more kids. They're supposed to be in school, things happen, and you're gonna see an influx. And I don't think we're prepared at all. So I'm concerned about that. So if you could answer about the sheriffs and the availability, the other 3 to 6 beds that are gonna be needed in the interim.
Yes. In terms of the other 3 to 6 beds, that's the one neat thing about the Wyndham facility is that there is space to grow. We are starting out right now with 2 to 3 beds just to see how it goes. But there would, if there is a need, and you're probably right, there is, we do have ability to expand, particularly on the first floor, not so much on that bottom floor. And yeah, the situation over the weekend, I can't discuss specifics, but we were able to come up with a solution that we did not need the sheriffs, because you're right, we only had sheriff support for about 8 hours, for an 8-hour shift. And that is such a concern that we are starting to talk with our consultant, Rob Evans, about finding perhaps our own type of security detail, or we try contracting with others, but perhaps to do something where when we need that type of support, and it's not that often where we need sheriffs, but when we do, there'll be somebody under our contract that we can rely upon more readily because of the staffing situation. And that's what the problem is. It's not that the sheriffs don't want to come, it's that they don't have the staff to support us necessarily when we have to do this at the last minute. And that's when problems come for us. They're not planned. Children, you know, these things, they do things at the spur of the moment, and we have to be able to respond and to keep them safe. Senator, I would like to link back. I was wondering if Jennifer Micah had anything to add in terms of the Newberry process, because I know she's been involved in that litigation as well.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. Jennifer Micah, General Counsel for DCF. I don't have really much to add. I just wanted to note that there are actually 3 parties in the litigation, which is DCF, and then we have the Citizens for Newberry and the Town of Newberry, just to clarify who's actually involved in the filing of the briefs. But other than that, I don't have anything to add.
Thank you.
So Representative Kelly Piella has a question.
Thank you. I went and toured the Wyndham facility at just after we had gotten out of session. And as I recall, the space was only zoned to be used for youth for 30 days at a time. So is local zoning a challenge with the, not so much with the short-term non-licensed bed, but for the 2 licensed beds that are for treatment and stabilization?
Mhm.
If youth can't be there for more than 30 days, is that going to be adequate? Is there a need to address local zoning around that?
Oh, Representative Bahala, I will need to double check because my understanding was we were looking for a program where our youth would be there for 45 to 60 days. I have not heard any issues in terms of having a problem with zoning at all. I'll need to loop back to the sheriff on that.
Okay. Thank you.
So I have a question about that facility. And Kelly, if you did take a tour of this, maybe you can help with this question. I know some members of my standing committee, one in particular, took a tour of this particular building and felt it was totally inappropriate to be housing juveniles, that it needed quite a bit of renovations because it was a building with office space. Has that been addressed? Are there any renovations going on in the building? And if so, who is paying for it? Where's the money coming from?
Well, I can't talk about where the money's coming from. When I was there, it did appear that there were renovations going on, and it seemed like that was something that was being addressed. I mean, it is an old office building. It's an old facility. It definitely needs work for it to feel like a welcoming environment for youth. But and I don't know where the construction currently stands.
I mean, in order for it to be licensed, it has to meet certain criteria for the building itself. So who is paying for these renovations? Is it us or is it the sheriff?
In terms of renovations, I know that we've had our licensing folks out there, the fire marshals have been out there and all the other appropriate entities, and that the only major renovation was that they wanted another egress for the basement. I'm not sure, Tyler, if you remember, in terms of payment for those construction costs.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. My name is Tyler Allen, for the record, Adolescent Services Director, Family Services Division. With regard to the facility, the program, the longer term program would be in the lower level of it, which is a more secure portion of the building. Understandably, there were concerns about the upper levels having lots of big open windows in it, so on and so forth. If we have a youth who is unstable going into that practice, into that building, we want to make sure they're held in a place where they're safe, where they can't do damage or potentially break a window or get out or something along those lines easily. So it would be the lower level that is being renovated. My understanding is we have been working with BGS and securing and developing the contracting and leasing all this, and the costs associated with renovation would be defrayed in the contracts for use over time. So it's not an upfront payment through DCF, but I do need to get verification of specifically what the payment method is.
So you were cutting in and out, so it was really hard to hear total. There was muffling on this end. It was hard to hear. So what I heard was DCF working with BGS in looking at this space, which is really the bottom level, not the first floor, because it's more secure in terms of windows. But what about, you're going to be licensed. So in any healthcare facility, be it a secure residential or even the old Woodside, it had to be built to certain standards. Suicide prevention, secure building. I'm assuming it's building secure, not staff secure.
This building is staff secure.
It's staff secured, so the building can be a little softer in terms of the outside. So you're working with BGS on this. Where are we in the process of the renovations?
My understanding is we're in the midst of renovations. I'm sorry, I'm leaning in a little closer now. I'm hoping I'm not cutting out quite as much. And you are right, our licensing has been out to the program multiple times and has put together a list of things they would like to see incorporated as part of the renovations, making sure that there's some window space for the rooms and so on and so forth. We have egress as addressed, and it will be up to licensing standard when it's completed. As we said earlier, our hope is that the renovations will be completed by the end of this summer. I think the biggest barrier to that was making sure we have a second egress put into that basement space. But other than that, things are proceeding.
So is this for 2 beds?
This is for the 2 beds.
The bottom level, and then 1 bed up on the upper level, more in a room to keep it more secure. And that would be the very, very short-term stabilization for someone pending placement.
And where would the office space be? Would that be down in the bottom level where the 2 beds are, or is that someplace separate?
Office space for like FSD workers or for the other individuals that the sheriff is trying to bring into the space?
Well, both. I mean, you've got to have somebody working there.
We will have rooms for our workers down on the basement level where primarily where the program is for the longer term youth. But I believe the upper level would be more general traditional office space.
So all these renovation costs will be incorporated in the contract that you negotiate with the sheriff? Because the sheriff owns this building, correct?
Correct.
For the county.
Well, it's the sheriff, so it'd be in the county budget, I'm assuming.
Can I just clarify? So I'm having a hard time understanding who's paying now. I understand that there'll be a negotiated, means of reimbursement, but is it in fact the sheriff now who's incurring the costs?
Yes, we haven't negotiated our lease yet with the sheriff, so we haven't paid anything yet to him. It's all going to be negotiated once we get the final licensing and the building is up and ready for us to let the kids come in.
We've done that in the past, but usually we have a little bit of an idea what the renovations are going to cost. So do you have an idea of how much has been spent so far on the renovations?
I don't have that at my fingertips, but I can find that out and provide it to the committee. And I do believe that those renovation costs at this point, I believe the sheriff is paying those out. So I know that we haven't paid those. There may be some contracting or return into reimbursement, but I'll have to get those numbers from him.
So the sheriff has purchased this building for the county. The county. Is that going to be incorporated in our rate as well, or just the renovations?
I don't believe that's going to be incorporated in our rate at all, because he's going to have a lot of he's got very big plans for this building that are entirely outside of the small use DCF is going to be taking on.
Quick question. Is the sheriff going to operate the 2-bed program, or is some other provider going to be hired to operate that program?
Another provider will be operating that 2-bed program. That is a treatment program with one of our.
Do we know who yet?
We're still working on it. I can't say at this point.
Teresa and then Phil.
Thank you, Deputy Commissioner. I have a couple of questions. My first is around any kind of, has there been any kind of neighborhood meeting or any kind of notification of neighbors to this building about what the intent is for use of this building, either by the sheriff's department or by DCF or both?
I believe the last time we spoke with the sheriff, he mentioned he planned on having neighborhood meetings and that we told him we'd be more than happy to join him. So I'm not sure if he's had them yet. I know I haven't participated in any, but he may have had some already. I believe he has done some outreach.
Can I
With,
offer a piece of information about the neighborhood?
Go ahead, Kelly.
It's not in a neighborhood, it's actually in a much more industrial park kind of feeling area.
there are other buildings owned
There are
by other
yes,
people.
there are buildings and other people and other businesses, just, it's not the sense of the neighborhood is not a residential neighborhood. It's much more a commercially zoned area.
So that's, thank you, Representative Payala. So I still think that it's inherent upon us not to repeat maybe past errors of omission in terms of making sure that we understand what the neighborhood, whether it's, commercially zoned or otherwise, what their potential reaction or information that they may need in order to understand what's going to happen here and understand how, in fact, they may be helpful to the program. My second question is around everything that we had talked about previously had been identified resources for those individuals who identify as being male. And I'm just wondering, we obviously have had a situation earlier this year that continues around an individual who identifies as being female. And will this resource in Windham County be available to any gender identified individual?
Yes, it will. And you've got an excellent point that we have noticed that our female population, there has been some increased activity, and that is an area of need for secure placements that we absolutely have to address.
And will there be outside space at this location?
There is an opportunity for outside space because there's a large open field. And the last time we spoke with the sheriff, he was definitely amenable to trying to have some kind of recreation outside for, when it's appropriate for the youth. We still have to be careful to make sure that they're safe.
That would be for the one person who's under the sheriff's supervision, not the 2-bed that you're gonna contract out with a private provider. Is the sheriff gonna have control of those 2 folks as well?
No, that would be the sheriff's as the sheriff as an owning
the building.
property, those are improvements that he's willing to make. But the ability to go outside when, appropriate in the level of care would be for the youth either on the basement or on that upper floor.
Bill, and then Butch?
So I'm getting a very different picture than I had before this meeting, which is I didn't know that there was not a program provider in place. I didn't know that the sheriff apparently will have other uses for the upper floors, and then people will enter through these spaces theoretically to go into the upper floors, if not through those secured spaces, still moving through those levels up to the upper levels for whatever purposes he has in mind. I have to say, it doesn't sound ideal. And I understand that this is a fallback position, but I'm just feeling as though we have one opportunity, which is Newberry, which is a fallback depending on a reversal of a court or of a review board decision. And then in this case, we're pinning a lot of our hopes on a facility that seems, to be retrofitted to be this sort of thing. And to go to the representative's point about repeating past errors, it seems like we're allowing ourselves, instead of designing from scratch or creating something more or less exactly what we need, we're creating a series of contingencies, hoping that they work out for the best. So I could imagine a meeting 6 months from now where the Newberry opportunity has fallen through, the neighbors are upset about this particular building, and maybe we can do something there and maybe we can't. In your report at the end, you say, in conclusion, in the next 5 months, DCF will continue to move forward in developing holistic residential treatment facilities. Progress in sustaining these will occur through partnership. The department will prepare plans outlined, et cetera. Very, very general language. And it doesn't, I don't think, take too pessimistic a point of view to look at both of the options you have here and see that it might be that neither comes to fruition. And so I guess I'm wondering, is there a plan C, that's, maybe we bite the bullet and we say, we were wrong from the word go to close Woodside, and we need a facility designed more or less from the get-go for this population. What would your thinking be about progressive worst-case scenarios?
I understand what you're talking about here. And one, it's sort of hard to describe the Wyndham facility without you seeing it, that one of the issues with the egress is that you're not going to have the general population coming where the youth are. So that it's not going to be as, inappropriate or as you may be thinking. But your larger point of what about starting from scratch? I don't look at these as an either or. I'm looking at it as an and, as in when we do have these larger conversations with the juvenile jurisdiction stakeholders group and the people with lived experience, that we can also have another facility to address our continual needs, because our needs are significant. I mean, it's a small population that needs secure placement, but it does exist.
If I could expand on that particular question and your response before we go to Butch. You just explained that, yes, there is a need for housing a small number of juveniles who are involved in the court system. The question is, who provides those services? Do we contract that out, or is it a state-run facility? That's the underlying question. If it's a state-run facility, then it's a state-owned facility. If it's not a state-run, then you contract out with providers, or you pay somebody to lease the building. So I think that's the fundamental question. Are we going to have a state-run operation for this, or are we going to contract it out?
And that's the question we have been grappling with. But I know, Jennifer Micah, I believe you said you wanted to weigh in here.
I'm happy to weigh in. I wanted to, we were required to prepare this report and then prepare a plan for you come December. And we have, in fact, started these discussions, get to the heart of the questions that you're asking, whether it should be publicly owned or privately run or publicly run, whether we should start from scratch, whether we should build up existing programs, whether we should create a larger program where we can get other, potentially other organizations involved. These are all questions that we're trying to grapple with now. And so I guess what I would say is, I hope that if you have ideas about what the legislature would like to see, we're very, very interested in hearing it, because we are, we raised with the Juvenile Justice Stakeholders Group. We've started discussions on this issue, and there is a whole question about whether we even need a secure facility. There are differences of opinion about that most basic question. Some people say that the experience of the pandemic indicates that we really don't need one, that the efforts that DCF made showed that we can do it without creating new facilities. And other people say, absolutely not. The acuity of the youth and the constant state of stress for so many providers and for people at DCF was too great, notwithstanding the fact that much of the time it did seem to work out, but at what cost to which youth? Every time you displace a youth, you have potential additional trauma, even when you are able to find a placement for a high acuity youth. So I guess I just wanted to say that this is obviously the preliminary report of how we're setting ourselves up, what we're thinking about, so that for the next 3 or 4 months, we can have these discussions and slowly funnel the main issues and bring you what we hope will be a real plan for these different groups of youth, remembering that we're going to have to deal both with the under 18 crowd and the over 18 crowd. And how we do that and who we partner with are all things that we are continuing to grapple with. So I guess I just wanted to say that we weren't tasked to bring you today what we will bring you come December.
Dick and then Butch.
I appreciate that very much. But I want to, if I look at the last, or the next to last sentence on the Wyndham facility, it says the licensed program will primarily serve youth with more acute mental health needs. I think I need a better understanding of why DCF is being asked to deal with kids with acute mental health needs, just as I need a better understanding about why the Department of Corrections is being asked to deal with adults with acute mental health needs. This is something that is of great concern to me, and it's obviously nothing that we asked for in the report, but I think it highlights the challenge. I ran a program for almost 40 years dealing with delinquent kids, and I think we understood delinquent kids. I don't think we ever understood kids with acute mental health needs. And you can't be all things to all people. And if we're asking corrections to deal with 15, 16, and 17 and 18-year-olds with acute mental health needs, and we're asking DCF to deal with 16, 17, and 18-year-olds with acute mental health needs, where is the Department of Mental Health? And where are the programs that we're paying good money for, like Brattleboro Retreat? I am more concerned about the direction I see us headed, where kids with significant mental health problems act out violently, not because they're delinquent or criminal, but because they're acting out because they're not getting treated. And they end up in your system or your system, Commissioner Dummel. He's sitting right next to me, so as I point to him, this really, and I'm sorry I didn't bring it up earlier because it stands out. It stands out. And we're asking you to do something that really, you dealt with neglected kids. Yeah, they've got a lot of emotional trauma. You dealt with delinquent kids, they've got a lot of problems. But it's not the same as acute mental health needs. So I'll stop there. And I think that really, maybe we're asking you to deal with kids you shouldn't be dealing with, that the mental health department should be dealing with.
I guess I can say that I know that the Secretary of the Agency of Human Services has been discussing with everyone in all the different departments need for us to have more cross communication and assistance between departments. And we have been having those discussions, and we are in fact including DMH in our discussions with around these facilities. Or I shouldn't say these facilities, but with this plan that we're going to be coming to you with. And I think that this, as much as departments don't usually like to have to do reports and plans, I think this is a great opportunity for DCF and the other departments to really think about how to address these issues. And so I am hopeful that we will get somewhere. I don't know how far, but I am hopeful that we will take some steps to address some of the issues that you are raising. And I do think that, you know, the pandemic has just been brutal. It's been brutal on the staff at all of the different facilities. It's been brutal on the children that we serve. Even kids who don't come from traumatic backgrounds are struggling. And so I think that we're both in a situation where we can potentially come up with some great ideas for kids. And we also have to recognize that what we've seen over the past couple of years may not hold over the years. You know, we're resilient, and it may be that some of what we're seeing now and the high acuity and so many kids that we're not used to may be temporary, and we don't know. And we have to come up to you with a plan that addresses both the current situation and what we hope will be the future situation.
Butch?
I want to back up a little bit and move away from this conversation a little bit. And Commissioner, I have some concerns about who's on the hook for Wyndham. I've heard some concerns about permitting. I've heard some concerns about costs so far. I've heard concerns about neighborhood meetings, payments and the rates. Payments and the rates doesn't surprise me. I've dealt with that before, but it seems like we're pretty much pie in the sky with a sheriff that may not be there next year. Who's on the hook? Who's financially on the hook right now? Where does the state of Vermont stand in this process? And what happens if the process falls apart? Who do we owe what?
At this point, we aren't on the hook because we haven't contracted or even have a lease with the sheriff. But it will be a situation where we will be either leasing space from him or from the sheriff and the county. And then we'll also be contracting with the program that handles the issue handles the youth program on the bottom level. And there'll also be an hourly rate for any sheriff support on that very short-term program. But it is, so I do believe there will be, financial responsibilities for the state coming out of, DCF, FSD's budget in terms of supporting these programs for the youth that are in our care and custody. But in terms of the actual building costs, my understanding is the sheriff is purchasing that building along with the county, and that's not our responsibility.
So this is a pretty big endeavor. It's a big switch to what we were going down the road over here. Now we're going down a different road. It would seem to me that you would have, if not a legal, but some sort of a moral responsibility to get back to this committee as you progress with contractual talks with the sheriff to just advise the legislature of what's happening. I think there's a lot of open questions here that members have asked that, you could have a contract before January 1 or January 4 or whenever we're back in session. So I think you morally owe it to this committee to keep us abreast of what's going on in Wyndham on a regular basis.
We can schedule that back in September,
Yeah.
put that on our schedule. We're meeting again probably middle of September. We can put you back in on our schedule, on our agenda to do a check-in.
We'd be happy to give you an update, particularly if our timing goes right by the end of August, we should be up and running. So those contractual issues would have been worked out.
Yeah.
So just to build on Representative Shaw's questions, I understand you to be saying that we are not on the hook now until something is negotiated and signed. Does the sheriff agree that we're not on the hook? In other words, as I understand you, we're agreeing to defray his costs in the eventual contract. So have there been representations to him that these egress construction costs will eventually be picked up by the state?
That is not my understanding of it. I would need to defer to Tyler. He may have more, up-to-date information, but I did not believe we were going to be refunding him any costs for the building. My understanding was he would be purchasing the building, and anything we were bringing in terms of special adjustments and things like that, we might be on the hook for. But Tyler, is that not true?
I think in the framing of this conversation, I'd agree with that, Deputy Commissioner. I would just add that DCF has an existing contract with Sheriff Anderson, and we do utilize him and his deputies for many different services, including doing dispatch work for engaging sheriffs all around the state for us, including setting up staffing patterns and programs, and one in Bennington, one in Morrisville area. And the part of the benefit of this building is that it is his office building, and he will be staffing it with his deputy staff on the 3rd floor of the building. And so one of the arguments to be made is, in this time where it's increasingly challenging to find sheriff supports, being able to operate our program with close access to where their program, to where they operate, it helps to ease the burden of transportation for deputies having to move across the state to staff a case across the state, so on and so forth. So I would just, the context here is we enjoy a very healthy partnership with that sheriff who continues to go above and beyond to support the needs of DCF. And I think we do need to honor that relationship. I do understand the point made that sheriffs can change in communities. So that is a good point. But I think this is also a mutually beneficial arrangement that will satisfy not only DCF's need to have sheriff support and to be able to operate a programming to address a high acuity needs caseload, but also there's contractual benefit to the sheriff that it makes it well worth his while too. And I don't see us wanting to step back.
I agree, Tyler. Not only is there contractual benefit, and even when do sheriffs change, contractual terms remain in place till they expire. And I think that this is something that both parties here are looking forward to meet a need in the community for the youth, to keep them safe and to provide treatment. So I'm not anticipating that this is going to be a sort of a fly-by-night, impermanent type of program.
So I just want to clarify this, that the whole building will be owned by the sheriff, and the sheriff will be doing some of his operations as county sheriff out of that particular building, correct?
That is correct.
So I cannot help but jump to the next stage, that the sheriff needs some help for the operating costs of the building and is looking to the state to help him with that. Because we will be leasing that building. We'll be leasing some space within that building that then helps the sheriff with the upkeep and operating costs of that building. That's how it works. So I just want to put that on the table for people to be aware. That's the project.
Hopefully I find a beautiful day on to drive over to Brattleboro and take a look.
Just thinking the same.
Just go over the mound. They're working on the ledges, so it'll take a little extra time, so hopefully.
So as you can tell, there's a lot of interest in how we move forward here. I don't know if DOC has been part of any of these conversations with DCF because you're part of producing a plan as well. We're part of this, particularly for Raise the Age. But also the concern is if there needs to be a secure placement of our youth who are involved in justice system, we need a secure setting. If we don't have it, by default, they end up in a correctional facility, as we have seen. And we're very concerned about that. And that's why DOC, I'd like to offer an opportunity for them to weigh in at this point with any of your thoughts.
Yeah, no, I think that that's right. As far as this process goes, you know, this is squarely in the lane of our DCF colleagues, but we are interested and involved heavily in the process for what happens to youths, you know, irrespective of these physical structures that we're talking about in the state of Vermont, because you're right to highlight that in the event that there's not a secure placement somewhere else, and it's acceptable under federal and state law, they do come to DOC, and they have, and we've seen a fair number of those recently. So, you know, it's something we're very concerned with because we want to make sure that the state is serving the individual in the best way possible. I think in the recent example, it was a tough situation, particularly because it's a female. I only say that based on the structure of our facilities, and we have a little more flexibility with the male facilities than we do with our sole female facility. But I think I wanted to highlight just some of the amazing work that the state as a whole, DCF, DMH, and DOC did to serve that individual, and did just a amazing job in an odd place to do it. I think we'd all agree, but it really did serve the needs of that individual for that period of time. And we did that also in partnership with the Vermont Network and some of our partners that we already have in place at the Chittenden facility. And that made all the difference because we were able to provide a full suite of wraparound services for an individual who needed that at that time. So I only highlight that to say, we are, I guess, a last resort option. And when we become the option, we really do lean into it and try to provide the best services we can. We do that in partnership with DCF, and they really leaned in and helped us in that situation and with others. But certainly we're interested in the process. We don't have a lot of equity in this part of the plan here on building a facility and things of that nature.
But you're the fallback when there isn't a placement. DOC's the fallback. And I appreciate what you said about the last case that you just had with a young female, and that there happened to be wraparound services within that facility to begin with. If there's a male, what facility do they go to? Is it Rutland, or is it just Rutland? And are there wraparound services there for the male? Like there were for the
I can do
female?
that. Rutland is our primary option. We do have the ability to set that up either in St. Johnsbury or Newport if we had to, if Rutland for some reason was available. The physical space at Rutland that we use leaves much to be desired. It's one of our smallest units because we have to empty it for that individual. So visually, it's not a very appealing unit, but we can pull together resources wherever. That's one of the benefits to being at a facility, is that we already have a bunch of those resources there. And then we work with our DCF partners to provide some more. But it's very much an ad hoc, one at a time sort of process to maintain sort of an ongoing juvenile program for, we might have one for a week and then we might not for another month. Isn't really within our purview. So in terms of a short-term response to, we don't have a place to put this particular youth this weekend or this week while we find a more permanent place. That's a need we've been able to meet, not without some heavy lifting, not without some work, but we've been able to keep people safe and provide services as best we can. In terms of us doing that on sort of a longer term function, be really concerned about that and concerned about how we can meet the needs of that youth. I mean, part of the reason why Raise the Age and all that in there is recognizing that corrections has not always met the needs of these youth well. So then to have them end up with us anyway ends up with a great concern. As a short-term solution, we do that well.
So how many of those short-term solutions have you had since the beginning of January to date? You know, off the top of your head?
Single digits, low single digits, 3, 4. I think 4 counting the female.
So we have a person.
And generally for fairly short periods of time, a week or
2, 3.
I will say, we have to underscore the impact of introducing a youth into one of our facilities is enormous. It reverberates throughout the entire system because there are laws, as you all are well aware, that require sight and sound separation in most circumstances. And then just additional security, safety, health implications of introducing a youth. And so those do have an enormous impact on our system, which is why short term it's feasible, not ideal. Long term, it becomes a huge challenge.
The sight and sound separation for those under 18 is particularly problematic in terms of the environment we're holding that youth in. And depending on the court ruling, the interest of justice, we can provide for some sight and sound socialization outside of the living unit, but inside that living unit, they're alone. And given that we only have 1, 2 at the most of these youth, we're isolating somebody in a way that I would never do to an adult, and I'm legally required to do so for a youth. So it's a situation where we're not very comfortable with. We do a lot to ameliorate those impacts, but we've never considered that ideal for the youth or for the department.
And some of that is a feature of the Vermont system. It's small. We don't often have juveniles, youth, so the numbers are small. Whereas in a larger system that may house additional youth, you can commingle youth, and so there's socialization. But in Vermont, we don't have that opportunity in our correctional system. So the original public policy goal of sight and sound separation is a good one, except in a system where you only have one individual, and then it becomes in some ways punitive.
But in this case, it was because Sununu wasn't available, am I correct?
In the case of the 15-year-old?
Yeah, the 15-year-old girl. But
I won't speak to that case specifically, but I'll say in general, there have been limitations with Sununu because of their census and their staffing levels over the last several months. And certainly our DCF colleagues can comment on that as well.
was Sununu not available?
I agree with Commissioner Dimmel. Just speaking in general, there have been times due to Sununu's staffing challenges that they have not been readily available to us.
Well, I mean, it's a public record because the girl was treated as an adult at 15, so I'm a little freer in speaking about it personally. But that's up to all you. Is Sununu, do we have anybody at Sununu right now?
Yes, sir. I believe we have 3 people. Is that correct, Tyler?
Okay, so that would indicate a need for 3 beds.
I would point out just that some of these youth, irrespective of need, cannot end up in corrections.
Right.
If they're not charged in a certain way or the case isn't remanded. So I know DCF has some youth and some of the ones who may be at Sununu currently that just legally could not set inside our doors, that were not even a backup option for it.
I was talking to the program development report based upon the numbers that you see and need, and would indicate that 3 is, at least right today, is the need.
One thing that's concerning to me is, if you're a state's attorney and you're looking at what charges to file against a youth, and you're trying to venues pick in some ways, you're going to charge differently to try to get the outcome for that individual that you think is best for them. And I think there's been some examples of that lately, which is a concerning kind of pardon the word, but a perversion of justice, because you're charging them differently than you might otherwise, except that you're trying to do it to get them in a facility or a location that you think is going to best serve their needs. And so there are some of these oddities of the system at the moment because of our limitations.
Well, as everyone in this room and those on Zoom have seen, there is a frustration on many of our parts of really trying to figure out how we're going to move forward here with our vulnerable youth. And I'm hopeful that come September, when we have you back, we might have a better direction. I don't know, but I'm really hoping that come January, the language is put in here specifically so that next session, the administration will have a proposal on the table and we can start acting on it in the legislative end. That's the goal. And we may need to start looking at a state-run facility. State-owned, state-run, and start looking at where we own state land currently.
Well, you're better equipped at that than I.
I'm going to leave it there.
I will say, I understand there's some land in Windsor.
There's some in
Oh, boy.
Middlesex. Too. Some in Middlesex too.
Some in Pittsburgh too.
Mm-hmm.
We have land in Pittsburgh too.
We have land in Pittsburgh. Yeah, we have some state land.
Yeah.
Because some people have to get off the dime and start asking questions.
There's land in Bennington, but it's got a monument on it. You
Anyway,
can't have it.
you can't have it.
No.
Any other?
Just a little bit of it, sir. Just
A little bit,
small
a
thing.
little bit. Just-
It could be remodeled.
Anything else before we finish on this and then shift gears to restorative justice?
I think the only thing that I would say, Madam Chair, is, and this is, I guess, really directed at the department, is that I hope we have some more definitive responses in September beyond I believes, and, you know, some, hopefully some of your contract negotiations have proceeded in the meantime, and we're able to have a clearer picture about what the state's obligations are with regard to the program that you've briefly outlined here going forward. So thank you for being here this afternoon.
Thank you very much for having us. And again, I'd just like to reiterate what Jennifer and Micah indicated in terms of this is a preliminary plan, and we do a preliminary report, and we do anticipate to have much more of a firmer plan as indicated in December.
So thank you all for coming in, and Representative Paiello, thank you for taking some time out today to do some legislative work. I hope this testimony has been helpful for you and for everyone. And we will schedule at our next meeting in September, we will put this on the agenda again for another update.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Got a bridge.
Huh?
I have a bridge if you'd like.
You have a bridge?
Yeah, I'm glad to stop there. Yeah.
We can rent the bottom level of the bridge and then the top level of the bridge.
There you go. We'll put tolls on the top and underneath we'll put people.
It's an ongoing issue for going on 3 years now.
Yeah, this particular construct, the more you hear it described, it just sounds so wishful. It's like you can do everything with it and nothing will impinge on anything else. And the security issues won't overlap, you know. So if you got law enforcement trying to work here and you got a secure or even semi-secure facility here, there have to be overlap issues.
Well, you're going to have some common areas, and that's my concern in terms of how you negotiate the rate and how you negotiate the lease. I mean, some of us that are involved on buildings end, kind of know those little nuances. And then you get into maintenance of the building, maintenance of your space. Who pays for that? Is it us that pays for that? Is it part of the rate? Because look at when we do renovations for something, and we know we're going to pay it back in the rates, we have an idea of what those renovations are costing.
Right. And I mean, you know, this may be a temporary or short-term solution. So I would also hope that we don't enter into some kind of 10-year lease or something. Because the optics of having a quote unquote treatment facility in a sheriff's office, I'm sorry, in an industrial zone with.
Well, we We had 9 people or 8 people in an industrial zone in Middlesex for 10 years or more.
It's a little more rural than what we're talking about.
Yeah.
That at least had land near it,
Yeah.
but the
Yeah.
land might be worth looking at.
And it was adjacent to the state police, but not in the same building. I don't know.
I don't think.
I'm holding out my opinion. I think I might make a trip down.
I think this is a pretty long-term proposal, Teresa, really.
Is the sheriff up for reelection? This time around?
So if you do, go
Might be
ahead.
up right now.
If you have a smartphone,
It's every.
even if you could take like
Is it
minute videos.
Parsons County?
Yeah.
Oh, I think
4 years?
several, well, yeah, well, I don't know.
But getting
I don't
that
know.
Pretty slim.
Yeah.
Rutland County, I don't know.
Static photos.
Windsor County, the sheriff. So
Yeah.
I don't know if they're up in all the counties.
I remind myself of
Madison.
video.
Maybe Dick knows.
Yeah.
Well, I.
Submitted as evidence. in the-
Hey, Dick, are all the sheriffs up for reelection
Yes,
this year? It all runs together, okay.
but I don't think Sheriff Anderson has any opponent.
No, I don't think he does either.
He's probably pretty.
Pretty safe. Well, let's shift gears. Restorative justice, we've got Stephanie Barrett with us to talk to us about the funding. And then we also have folks who are involved in the restorative justice as a whole system. We have folks in the Attorney General's office, we have folks in the
Set up. You can, yes, sit wherever you want, Stephanie. That's where the best camera angle is.
We have a heavy lift in terms of understanding funding of restorative justice, but also understanding the whole system of restorative justice. That's one of our directions as the Justice Oversight. So we will have to schedule some time, a September meeting, to really grapple with our system of restorative justice and all moving pieces, how they work and how they don't work, and where all the funding goes.
So I'm going to focus on the funding, but Willa did provide me with some great documents that you probably already have a bit, but there's 2 documents here. One is a one-pager back-to-back, and one's a stapled 4 pages of a 11-page document that sort of lays out the system that is up online. I sent it to Peggy, which I assume means Mike knows it's got it posted or wasn't quite sure how the committee assistant.
So, Stephanie, before you get too involved, let me lay out what we as a committee need to study.
Yep.
We need to study Vermont's restorative justice programming and services, including the administration and funding of pretrial services, court diversion, balanced and restorative justice initiatives, and community justice center services, with a purpose to develop recommendations for a comprehensive and efficient statutory framework for programming and services that will further restorative justice principles. So we need to consider strategies for ensuring geographic consistency and equity, and recommend any changes to streamline the restorative justice programming and services that coordinate the roles, responsibility, and funding of the Office of AG, DCF, and any other entity that administers restorative justice. We have a heavy load. So we'll start with all the funding pieces.
Yeah, so this page, okay. This one pager that's black and white, that's got a fair amount of text on it. The 3 major components of funding for restorative justice in the Attorney General's office, court diversion, DOC, the barge program, and then the grant program that comes out of DCF, I mean the barge program, and then the grant program for community justice centers that comes out of DOC. And you can see the FY23 total funding in each of those buckets. So it's just about $3 million at the Attorney General's for court diversion. Most of that is general fund, but a little under 10% of it is through the fees that are generated in that program. In DOC, the barge, DCF, sorry, I keep mixing them. In DCF, the barge program is at $1.27 million now in FY23. That's up a bit from previous years, about $250,000, because we moved money out of DOC into DCF's barge program in the budget you just recently built.
So just to stop you there, the money comes out of DOC?
No, this is the direct appropriation within DCF, but when we built the 23 budget back in the session, the decision in the budget in the end moved 250 into this program. That was money that was essentially found in the DOC.
Do those go out as grants?
All but about $100,000, a little over $100,000 they're planning to keep for professional development of the barge contractors. But about 1.13 or 4 and some change is going to go out in grants.
Trevor, and then Coach.
Yeah, I just want to clarify the point about the 250,000. It wasn't coming out of existing base funding. It was money that was added by the Senate, I believe, on a request from Barge. 250 got put into the DOC budget.
Oh, that's right.
And we,
Yeah.
well, that belongs in DCF. And so in conference, it got changed.
I was just on the last step. I'm sorry. Thank you.
Is that 1.27 million for the barge funding? Is that all general fund?
That is all general fund.
Butch?
And then in DOC is just shy of $3 million for the grant program in the base that goes out to the Community Justice Center providers. This year in FY23, in addition to the grants that are the $2.93 million going out, a little over $200,000 is also going out on top of those grants. It's approximately a 7% increase. That was, but it's one-time carry forward money. And it's a portion of that 417,000 one-time savings money that is going out.
Is that from the out-of-state bed savings?
From last year.
417,000.
Was the amount of the one-time portion of that savings.
Split it up.
Yeah, that's there was base funding that went to Vermont Network and management at DOC. And then the one-time funding was 417,000. That's in the C section of the FY23 budget. So reflects back to FY22 from carryover out-of-state funding savings from FY21. I think I got that right. My question is, my understanding, the way we did it in the budget, the 417,000 was supposed to go to the CJCs. And what I'm seeing here is that's not the way it's coming out of DOC. What changed?
You may want to.
This is the committee, Derek Miodevnik, Community and Restorative Justice Executive.
I can't hear you.
Derek Miodevnik, Community and Restorative Justice Executive, Department of Corrections. If I understand the question correctly, if DOC received $417,000 in one-time JRI money, and you're seeing $200,000 of that reflected in our grants, what's happening with the remaining approximately $215,000 or so? Is that the question?
No, my question is that in the C section of the budget, there was $417,000 one-time money available.
Yeah.
And the budget calls for that $417,000 to go to the CJC.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing the 417 going to the CJC.
Stephanie referenced part $200,000 above and beyond our general fund is going to account for COLAs. So of that 417,000, we're taking 200,000 and applying those over and above what would be the grant amounts. So
Over and above the 417?
That leaves.
I'm not understanding.
So they've essentially split the 417 in half, and they're putting 225 out with the grants.
Correct.
And that leaves a little less than $200,000 that they're thinking about strategic planning around the Community Justice Center, because that hasn't been updated. And then the next steps of how you put that out, I think, is to be determined.
Yeah, we're preparing for an RFP.
But it will go to the CJC.
Absolutely. So this may resonate for Chair Evans and perhaps Senator Sears more than others, but a lot of the original thinking behind the Community Justice Centers grew out of a public market study that an outfit named John Doble and Associates conducted in the late 90s. And it was a way that DOC directly engaged our public constituents and stakeholders and said, what do you want out of DOC? And one of the resonant themes led to the creation of the Justice Centers we're proposing, Commissioner Demo has, I believe, to use that remaining approximately 200 and 180,000 through a procurement process to work with selected vendors. We haven't concluded this process yet, to engage in a public survey process to do some visioning around the next chapter of DOC-funded community justice services.
And this plan was a collaborative discussion with the CJCs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I'm confused.
Welcome to the world of centers.
Looking over this list, I see where the Attorney General seems to provide money to mostly, except with the exception of Rutland, which is Rutland City. Is it Rutland County or Rutland City? County?
Yes.
Okay, good. What happens in Chittenden County? Does anybody besides Burlington, Essex, and South Burlington, Williston have services?
As it relates to the funding from the Attorney General's office, this is Bill Carroll, Attorney General's office. The Burlington Community Justice Center receives a grant to provide services, court diversion and pretrial services throughout Chittenden County.
Okay. And why does corrections fund specific communities and not counties?
If I may,
That was the follow-up to the 417.
absolutely, yeah, that's a function of history. So taking a brief step back, the original, what were called safer community grants through the Department of Corrections were issued to municipalities. That was the original design. And so I'm going back now into the late 90s and the early aughts. And the Department of Corrections issued requests for proposals that went out to municipalities. And at that point in time, the scope of activities that DOC was funding through what we call community justice centers was much narrower. It really was primarily what we call a reparative board. And the idea there was the more local connection between the community members who are articulating the harm to that local community, and the person responsible would produce a more impactful outcome with the person who needed to repair that harm. So originally, Senator, DOC got in the business, if you will, of funding different municipalities at that time when we were putting out calls and various municipalities responded. Fast forward 15, 20 years, the scope of those activities has grown. It's created textures and complexities that lead to a question such as that. Why would we have 4 localized grants in one county and 1 regional provider in another? So it's just iterated that way, but I think this is a great opportunity for us.
My guess is there'd be administrative costs to those too that are not seen in, for example, Lamoille County is all single, one restorative justice center. So when DCF, DOC and the Attorney General provide money to Lamoille County, I'm assuming it's one entity. And when all 3 of you provide money to Chittenden County, it's 4 entities. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah. And I don't know what the administrative cost is.
So this is just from the state grant perspective. It doesn't get into the underlying cost structure of any one of the organizations here.
So that's the crux of the issue, is the organization and the structure.
Yeah, I mean, in Wyndham County, for gosh sakes, Greater Bellows Falls Community Justice Center.
And they take care of Springfield.
Oh, where's that?
Springfield is now with Greater Falls, but Springfield.
But I thought that was in
grant.
Windsor County.
Yeah, but we didn't get the grant from
Oh.
DOC. It went to Bellows Falls instead.
So Senator Sears sort of jumped ahead of the,
Oh, it was.
it was meant to.
Jumped me ahead with his $400,000 question.
This also was provided basically by Willa, the structure of which ones have blended from all three pots of money or provide services or have grants from all three entities of the state, and which ones are, separate, maybe only get one stream of funding or two streams of funding, and a different entity provides the different, the services for barge, for example. And that was just to give you that at a glance. So you have just over $7 million in total in the base across these three funding streams. The two biggest being the Community Justice Center grants and the Diversion program, which are roughly equal in size. The color-coded sheet, which I'm not qualified to really go through or explain, but it does give you more structure. And if you, this is the 4-page document that you have in front of you.
Copies. I didn't
Yes.
get one.
Oh, you didn't.
I got the first one.
This lays out the various programs in a color-coded way, so you can see which programs fall under which, the Attorney General, DCF, Barge, and DOC Community Justice grants, which I found very helpful as somebody who mostly just thinks about the money, but wanted to understand how they relate to each other, and which services fell under which. And then online is the full 11-page document, and it gives more detail. Basically, on the summary below here, by organization, it gives you the county information in a little bit more detail. I just didn't print it out because I didn't know if the committee wanted to go into that at all.
So, I mean, in looking at the language in the Appropriations Act, what I read from this is that somebody someplace felt like the current system is too confusing, not efficient, maybe there's some effectiveness issues, I don't know, but it seems as though there was sort of a predisposed idea that there should be some change in what currently exists. And I just want to make sure I'm not reading into it.
You nailed it.
Okay.
I can give you some background.
I have a little bit of background on the DCF side of things anyways, but so I guess one of the things that I'm wondering about in terms of this committee, I mean, an undertaking like what's required here, it would take days and days of testimony. And I'm just trying to figure out really how we would effectively do something that is recommending proposed legislation, by December 15th. I'm just.
A heavy lift, but what happened.
I'm not sure it's possible, I guess is my question.
So what happened during this past legislative session? There were folks like you explained, Teresa, that were concerned about the community justice, the restorative justice system, that there's a lot of initiatives out there. There's a lot of entities that are providing services. There's a funding stream that's coming from a variety of places. And can we get a handle on this so that we really know what we're doing as a state in our restorative justice world? So this was a conversation that the chair of appropriations and I had back last year in October. So I suggested to her that, my committee would be willing to possibly take a look at this, and then thinking this is a heavy lift. So we put together 3 people, three of you. There was
Karen.
it was Mary, wasn't it? Mary Morrissey.
Yeah, it was Mary, yeah.
Yeah. So we put together 3 people, 2 members from my committee and Trevor from appropriations to really grapple with this. And they worked with Ben in terms of finding what current statute is in our restorative justice world. And if you look at the statute, It's a mess.
There are many statutes.
Hmm?
There are many statutes.
It's a mess. It's a hodgepodge and it's a mess. So as Trevor, Mary Morrissey, and Sarah Coffey started doing a deeper dive, they said, wait a minute, we've got to spend more time. We've got to find a mechanism to really look at this whole system as a whole and really figure out what is duplicative, what is not duplicative, the sources of funding, to really figure out how we move forward. And we were hoping possibly a working group could be put together to work off session, but that wasn't feasible. So as a fallback, it was to Justice Oversight for that.
I'll take the blame for the work.
I wasn't going to say that.
The Senate Appropriations Committee got concerned about creating a working group to do this. So pared down the language from the House passed version of the appropriations bill, worked with Representative Squirrel and I worked on what questions could we ask and have Justice Oversight take a look at this. But I think the fundamental problem is you have like 17 different ways of dealing with this problem in 17 different counties. And I think the fundamental issue for me anyway is how do we get some geographic consistency in how we use diversion, how we use pre-charge, et cetera, And this system doesn't seem to work that well at getting there by having 3 different agencies involved. So, if we came up with nothing else, recommendations on how to get to geographic consistency and diversion. Is there a reason that in Chittenden County, for example, you're caught stealing,
this is really
something?
fiscal, but these are the 3 funding entities, but I think you would want to probably have the state's attorney as another state entity in this picture. When you're talking about geographical consistency.
I think it's it's that, but it's also the funding where how much overlap is there if you have administrative costs? I think this is what you were looking at budget-wise.
Yeah.
Administrative costs of 3 different agencies being involved in Addison County, one of the smallest counties. And
That one's actually 2 agencies. It's just the barge pieces, Mr. Seals, and the diversion and the Community Justice Center are the same.
Some of the counties are 3.
Yeah.
Orange County has 3, a small county. Lamoille, about the same size, has 1.
Orange actually has.
County has 3.
Yes.
One is a diversion program and then 2 different justice centers.
Yes.
Yeah, it just, I don't know what the administrative cost is.
Did we hear during that process, for those of you who were involved in that, did we hear during that process that people in our various communities are being treated differently or accessing or having difficulty accessing services? Or in Chittenden County, you might go diversion, in Bennington County, you might not?
In Chittenden County, you might go pre-charge diversion. In Bennington County, you may go to court and then get referred to diversion. That's been the Judiciary Committee testimony over the years regarding the differences in how diversion's approached. So Chittenden County, you're caught shoplifting. You get pre-charge. You don't even get to court. Bennington County, you may get to court. You may get a deferred sentence. You may go diversion, well, whatever. And then in Lamoille County, completely different.
And Trevor, I think the other thing that came through in your 3 folks working on this, and I may be wrong, is that for the community justice centers, there's no cohesiveness with the justice centers. They're just their own entity wherever they may be. Is that what you came across?
Yeah, I mean, there's different flavors for sure, even within the same county, if you will. And to your point, Representative Wood, when you start looking at providing services, when you have a place like Lamoille or even in Chittenden with the Burlington Community Justice Center that are providing all those programs, you're likely to get better service and being better served in that environment. I heard that in a number of different places.
So how do we grapple with this in terms of who do we have come in to talk about this? How do we approach this at our next meeting? Because we got to do something here.
I think, Stephanie, I think we approach it from both the appropriation side. What's the simplest and how much are we spending on administration? And should it all be one organization, given the growth of this and the reliance on it? And then, state's attorneys, the defense bar, and others talking about how it works in the different counties and the different variances. And also judges are law enforcement. And I don't know how much pre-charge we do in Bennington County, quite frankly. I don't think there's much. I think that's a Chittenden County thing.
As statewide programs go, when we're looking at all of these together, it's roughly $7 million.
Right.
That's frankly
Some change.
not a lot of money, given all of these different entities being involved in it. It's a lot of money, but it's not a lot.
They also get grants elsewhere.
Right, I read that.
I know my local one gets money from the towns and it gets grants from other organizations. They're running an after-school program, for example, in Bennington, so.
One of the paths we could take about geographic justice, all of that, is the last page of the colored handout is using a sequential intercept. Which county uses each one of those, or those three, or 4 or 5 intercepts? How much do they use it? And you just referred to Chittenden County, probably uses intercept 1 way more than anybody else. Aggressive state's attorney might be up in 3 and 4. That's information that could be, maybe, is readily available. Little work from the Sheriff's and State's Attorneys Association, but one would think that we could find that out.
Well, if you remember, when we put in the pretrial services, originally those dollars came through DOC. And then a few years into it, because some of them were going to CJC, some were going, I think, to Diversion, but I'm not sure on that. After a few years of DOC funding, it got shifted over to the AG's office for them to administer.
That was in 16 or 17.
So what I've got for our September meeting is really looking at the geographic consistencies in our restorative justice programs, be it CJCs, be it diversion, be it centers for restorative justice, how they operate, how all of these operate. Might be worth having some folks from the different centers come before us and talk. I've heard looking at how much money is spent on administration. I don't know, would you be doing that, Stephanie, or do you have thoughts on where we could get that information?
Well, I'm looking to the programmatic people here, if they have a sense of admin versus service cost, and that might be a little bit hard to allocate, I imagine, in terms of, it's a lot of, like in the CJC grant program, it's a 10% match, which is mostly in kind. So some of those overhead pieces are part of that match potentially from the municipal entity, whether it's space or, some other portions of individual's time. I don't know if it's, a portion of a person's salary might be picked up at the municipal level, not all of it at the CJC level. So that's going to be a little bit hard to suss out. I mean, you could start with something as basic as understanding each of these entities, what the staff capacity looks like, and what the total budget of each entity is. Probably not too hard to get. And then you could probably look at what the state funding portion of that is, just as a sort of a grounding exercise in understanding. As you mentioned, some of these entities have other funding streams and do other programming outside of these three. But I imagine these three funding sources are the main funding sources for them. But that would be sort of the approach that I think might be doable, as opposed to really trying to estimate the admin overhead. As Derek was informing me earlier, that there are different, because some of these are municipal employees as well, there's different cost structures that are based on longevity and salary plans where they originate. So.
I mean, when I look at the first chart, it's considering strategies for ensuring geographic consistency and equity. And so I'm going back, Butch, to, your reference to this last page, which really shows us just for one of the 8 different services where somebody might be referred from, and it's obviously at different points. It seems as though having some understanding as a committee, is this representative of the rest of the, services as well? And if it is, then this looks like the sort of spaghetti string map of connections between, that seems pretty wacky for us to, for us to perpetuate, I guess, but I would imagine that all of these entities have a vested interest in remaining viable.
They do.
I mean, let's just be honest about that. But it seems like we should hear at least from, those that provide all of the services, and then those that provide, different portions of the services to get their different perspectives about it.
So that then whittles it down. Of the CJCs, which ones are providing all the services? Do we know? You can't ask all the CJCs. Who you ask, because there's no top entity that organizes the CJCs.
Collection of grantees.
It's DCF, Attorney General, and DOC, right?
Well, if you want the voice of the service providers, which is what I think I'm hearing, then in addition, hopefully, to their funding institutions.
Who do you go to?
Yeah, and they all, some are nonprofits, some are municipal, some are based in, it's.
Well, I have a connection.
The challenge of representation is a pressing one.
Well, I know that, like, for example, the history in Bennington was that they didn't want to accept a grant from the Department of Corrections, so they started their own countywide diversion programs because they wouldn't trust the Department of Corrections to continue the program. Of course, 20 years later, they may be sorry, but that was the reason that the select board chose not to do the grant. But the Bennington one took it over, took everything over, and is doing, as I said, they're also doing after-school programs. They're doing, I think they even have a secondhand clothes store.
So they're not getting any money.
They're getting money from all three.
All three.
But it's all going to one entity, and they have one executive director. That's what I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in Chittenden, are there 4 different directors, 4 different organizations receiving money with, corresponding administrative costs.
You know that in Chittenden County, there's 4 different directors.
Absolutely. Yep, we do have 4. I will say, if I may, and I'm happy to back this up with detailed numbers. I would characterize as minimal administrative costs associated with the grants to DOC. In many cases, there is somebody who's a director and has some administrative functions connected to that. But our grants are primarily for staffing, for the services, the core deliverables that are in our grants. And as Stephanie reflected, to the extent that there are administrative costs, those are often absorbed as part of the in-kind match. I think that this is not to diminish the need to have the conversation in any way, but I would encourage the committee not to over-index for the administrative inefficient costs, because I don't think, from my perspective as a grant portfolio manager, they operate with high admin costs to begin with. I think operationally, there's confusion in some cases. But as a steward of public dollars, I don't see a lot of wastage on administrative costs per se.
So one thing I'm looking at this piece, trying to figure out who to bring in for testimony to see how the system is operating. And I'll stop there as well.
It looks like Willa might have some.
Representative, I'd like to suggest that you also hear from the three funders. And I actually, and it may be because I'm immersed in this world, but I think it is actually less confusing than people might think. For example, court diversion and pretrial services exist in every county. There is geographic equity. The differences for diversion all stem from prosecutorial discretion. And that's well understood, I believe, in the State House. I guess I would just offer that I have some thoughts. My colleagues do. We meet regularly. We collaborate in training. There is a lot of similarity, but the services that each department funds are distinct and different. They share a foundation of practice of restorative justice philosophy, and similar to saving trauma informed, but they are distinct services. And I would suggest the only confusion is, as Representative Shaw suggested, at the front end of the system. Otherwise, they're very distinct services, and they happen to be funded by an array of organizations that range from municipalities to community action agencies to small nonprofits. And that's the history of the state putting services out to bid and finding who in the community is willing to work on.
And if I may concur and just add to that, I think that another layer of texture, which I think is salient, is that some of the services in this landscape are established in statute. And some are a function of the discretionary power of the commissioner to create grants. So one of the core services in the CJC grants, for example, are what's called COSAs, Circles of Support and Accountability. They're a widely valued public safety strategy. They don't derive their basis in any statute to date, whereas reparative probation exists as a statutory obligation of the Department of Corrections to ensure that this process of reparative work. So I do think, and I've got the opportunity to communicate a lot with Ben in the original iteration, picking a framework that understands which of these things have to happen because they're established in statute, and what does that infrastructure look like, and then how does that coexist, overlap with a set of activities that apply these restorative justice values, but are functions of, again, the discretionary power of the commissioners to give grants to nonprofit organizations. And as per the agency of administration, grants are intended to advance the interests of the communities to which are receiving those grants and providing the services. So I mentioned this only sometimes when we talk about community justice centers. I'm not sure that's widely understood that some of the things they do are a function of things that DOC has developed in partnership with communities, and sometimes they're a function of things that are now codified
And I think that's part of what causes legislators to start to ask questions about these things is when we hear from all of these organizations that they haven't had an increase in funding in, however many years, or that, their base budget has been level for X number of years. And, some other private community organizations are getting an 8% funding increase and we're not getting any. And, those are the kinds of questions that, we hear about here. And so then we end up with questions like this being posed in the Appropriations Act. I think it's inherent upon us as legislators to also understand that we have a responsibility for that as well.
If I can add, I'm Lindy Boudreau from DCF, the JJ Director. I oversee the BARGE program. I agree with what Willa and Derek have already put out as far as consistency. We have 11 providers that cover all of our 12 AHS districts for BARGE. We don't have legislative mandate to provide the services. We started it with federal funding in '98, and then the state assumed the cost in 2005. We do have the smallest budget, and it was our BARGE provider network that did advocate to the legislature this year regarding their funding. But I do think, as Representative Wood pointed out, we do have 4 agencies that have all 3 contracts, or we have contracts, they have grants. And so I think hearing from those folks, as far as kind of one-stop shopping, as we've talked about, is going to be a different perspective as far as equitable service provision and the seamless response from the community. And I do think the state's attorneys are a key part of this because that's where the discretion lies. And we can set up a system that may recommend a certain thing, but we can only do so much because there's a lot of control that sits at the state's attorney level. So I do think hearing from the providers who have that seamless response and others who may have 1 or 2 different agencies provide that service would be helpful. And I agree that hearing from us as the state funders would be helpful. Hopefully helpful.
Do the providers have an organization? I mean, like a statewide diversion organization where there's perhaps a couple of spokespersons from those organizations?
There is a Vermont Association of Court Diversion and Pretrial Services, and they have an executive committee. That group.
That'd be a place to start.
But that doesn't include the Justice Centers, though.
Or BARGE. Right, so we all have different representation. I meet with the directors myself, and I oversee that work with the BARGE directors and their case managers, and the court diversion has theirs, and DOC needs procedures.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Jill Evans, who runs the Essex CJC, they don't have a formalized structure, but she's been a point person for the CJCs for some years now. And I've been in communication with her on occasion. And in terms of bringing other people in here, Rachel Jolly, who runs Burlington, all 3 programs might be a good person to speak with. And she's been very involved in communicating with me through this whole process.
So this is what I was thinking before we shift over to Willa. I was looking at the breakdown here. And what Trevor's mentioning kind of plays into what I was thinking. We could bring in 3-4 folks, someone from a justice center that receives the funding from the 3 entities, and then individual community ones. So, and we could divide, we could look at it geographically.
Yeah.
If you do Burlington and you do Essex, because Jill is more of a point person, but then you kick into either Orleans or maybe Rutland, get out into, or Caledonia, get out into some of the other counties and see how that operates. That's one thought.
Yeah, I think it's important to have somebody from a, more rural as opposed to urban area.
Right, well, that's why I was thinking like at Orleans or Caledonia, it's very different from what you find in Burlington. Or Bennington, or even down in Windham County, it's gonna be a little different. So we can maybe, when I work with Ben on this, maybe we can, reach out to the 3 folks here and kind of take away at that. There's one thought.
Yeah, I would just add to that, if we're thinking about bringing the state's attorney's voice into this conversation, probably should reach out to Annie Noonan, because I know she's had some thoughts about this
Okay.
over time.
So this is what I've been hearing from everyone for our next meeting on this for testimony. In terms of trying to get a handle on the administrative costs, which could be difficult, number one. Trying to get a handle on geographic consistency, which will have to get into those individual justice centers or diversion or however that plays out.
The state's attorneys and the defender general pretty much have statistics on that sort of stuff, I think. Or at least can talk to us about anecdotally about what goes on in different jurisdictions.
All right, so I had listed the state's attorneys, defense counsel, as well as the courts.
Yeah.
The other thing I heard was we need to hear from the three funders, the three entities. And the other thing I heard, in terms of finding out what services are provided, we need to look at statutory requirements that are in there for the justice centers or diversion or all of them, and then look at what additional functions they provide. So that's what I was hearing, as well as looking at these sequential intercept models and finding out how often and at what stage they're used. Is it consistent across the state or not? So that's what I'm hearing for testimony for next September. And I think the starting point for Ben is maybe looking at what the statutory requirements are. So at least when we start taking testimony from all the entities, at least we'll know what the statutory requirements are. So you start with that, and then you look at the funding from the three folks, and then go into individual testimony.
But we've also started programs within diversion.
Yes,
like
we have.
restoring driver licenses from people who've had their license, either never had a license or had it suspended, had multiple suspensions that resulted in lifetime loss, and trying to restore those licenses, for example, is one program that we put in statute.
So that's what Ben has found when he's looked at the statutory layout, that it's a hodgepodge.
Yeah, it was alluded to it's a contract-based programming and service model anyway. It's not even statutory based. And then it's scattered throughout Title 28, Title 33, Title 2. And that's really, as Eric alluded to before, really a product of the evolution of this, starting out with DOC, but then has kind of expanded into this hodgepodge.
One of the things that I think might be helpful, so that it's kind of just not a free-for-all, and that because we're going to have a number of people testify, is to actually, provide folks with the questions that we're supposed to be answering, and say, in addition to whatever overview you're going to give us about your services or your program, these are the questions that we need to answer. And so do you have any recommendations about these two questions?
Be clear on what questions we need to answer.
Well, when you were reading it, I found it difficult to follow along, but when I read it myself, they make sense.
So,
yeah.
Representative Wood, you said something earlier about when we were talking about why people do this and why the various organizations are interested in it. Paraphrase you. There's something in it for somebody. And that's the truth. And we had an example of that in Rutland County a few years back when one of the providers was unprovided and closed down. And then there was a competition between the Rutland County Restorative Justice Center and the Community Justice Center operated now by Brock, the Opportunity Council in Southern Vermont. So it leads the question is, those folks, what was the impetus for Brock, who was a new player in the community here, to want to even be involved? They're not going to, they're a community opportunity provider. They generally are out looking for contributions and not.
Academic weatherization, for example.
Exactly. So they're a brand new player within 4 years maybe, Derek?
Yeah, COVID has really messed up.
Yeah, it's messed up
So I'll
everybody's
add
time.
another 2 years to that, just off the
So
bat.
4 to 6 years, so they're relatively new, I think, compared to all the other providers that are on the block, so.
So do you have two of them here? Because you have Rutland City Restorative Justice
Rutland County
Center,
Restorative, and
then you have Rutland City Community Justice
Justice
Center
Center.
at Brock.
At Brock.
So do you
right.
have two?
There are two. They're
Oh, one is
Rutland
a-
County Restorative Justice Center,
That
and the
one's-
other.
That CTY is county. I was just trying to make it fit on the page, so.
There are two
I got it.
providers.
Yeah. And are they doing duplicative work?
My questions have been right from the get-go is why would somebody who doesn't have a flush budget want to be involved?
They got money.
Yeah.
My guess is they see the impact of not providing.
Well, they're
Services.
involved with a lot of people in
There's a lot
the
of
county,
people.
in two counties actually. but, yeah.
We don't have a September date.
No, we don't.
Okay.
We might need 2 meetings.
Well, this one's gonna take more than one.
Yeah.
This one's.
Well, this stuff is,
This one's a heavy lift,
the
as is,
justice stuff
yeah.
is not easy.
And then we have the law enforcement data collection
Oh,
and interrogation.
That's not exciting.
No, that is not. And
That's gonna be,
we need to submit any proposed legislation, if any, by December 1st.
I think we need to talk to, what do you call it? RDAP. Wasn't that the data that they were looking?
This came out of House Gov Ops, right? This one?
Yeah, this one and Michelle's kind of running, variation stuff.
Oh, it's the different, oh, I'm sorry, I got confused with the,
It's,
well, I put my thing right. I thought we were-
Confessions or admissions to crimes were cured by providing a defendant with false
This
facts.
is about the- yeah,
Admissible,
about the-
providing false facts about evidence to a suspect during an interview. Use of interrogation and interviewing techniques, including the Reed technique of investigative interviews that was used up in Burlington, I believe. This was Keisha Ron. Came out of Senate Gov Ops and then went to House Gov Ops, right? And legislation initiatives or programs for the General Assembly and law enforcement to
I
consider.
had the wrong issue.
Yeah.
I thought it was the racial data. But that's important. Those are important issues to discuss.
So we got some heavy,
But I wonder if a summary from the law enforcement training count, the new law enforcement.
They actually called me after last, and I asked me to go up, and I met with them, and they were just kind of wondering, they were a little surprised that they had to do nothing.
but we had Bill Sorrell here at our previous meeting
Yeah,
last
but
month.
the management of the academy was
Oh, the
aware.
management of the academy, not the council.
That's in your district, right?
Pardon?
That's in your district.
Yeah,
But wouldn't the council, whatever the new name is, training,
Justice Council.
would they be the ones that are really putting this in place?
Well, it'll fall to the operators of the
Of the academy?
academy.
Be done with this.
That's what they're doing.
Somebody will say so.
Major buildings.
They're having a conversation.
You just.
Somehow that bill ended up, it was first referred to Senate Judiciary, then Senator White asked if they could take it up. And so they took it up in House Government Operations.
Yeah.
And I think but over the years, we've done a lot of interrogation techniques and so forth and put in requirements.
Would stay with me.
The bill did change some of the interrogation laws, but there was this aspect about false information supplying that, juvenile interrogations that testimony required further study to understand. changes.
And what came through last month and the testimony we received on this is to really look at the juvenile interrogation. That was the one that folks were recommending, that we look more at the juvenile interrogation.
Yes, right, because
That seems to be where there's issues.
well, there's a lot of,
Yeah, that's how the folks at the training academy got involved, because it involves how they teach interrogation.
is that the one with the gigolo letters in it too? Is that, we're supposed to study that?
That was part of that as well. That's not part of the work.
So this is way over my head.
Yeah, this is Julio, that's where prosecutors disclose potential impeachment information during the prosecution of a crime. And that would include, it was essentially the creation of a law enforcement officer database that would catalog any potential impeachment information for law enforcement officers that were involved in a case. So that required some more study as well. I would highlight these legislation are kind of qualified by if any.
If any.
So
We know that.
I don't know if that relieves a little bit of pressure, but just
We know that word.
I've heard it.
worthwhile mentioning.
Well, I think concentrating on the juvenile is probably the right thing to do.
So let Ben and I kind of work together here before we include Peggy in terms of trying to get some structure to meeting next month. One thing that we did, we talked about was in terms of the replacement, how we move forward with our justice involved juveniles, that we wanted to get testimony from the community partners. And there are no state beds operating. And we also wanted to hear from DOC their new staffing proposal that they put out, which is going to also entail BS state employees coming before us too. So that's what we're talking about in September. And then we'll deal with this restorative justice piece, nibble away at that. And our October meeting, we'll have to continue the restorative justice and maybe get into the juvenile interrogations. So Peggy, we need to send out a doodle poll for our September, October.
Yep. What dates do you want me to put on there? Is Tuesday still the days you want to look at?
Tuesday's still the day, Dick?
Tuesday or sometimes Thursdays.
Is that for? But we could, they could zoom in.
Certainly available by Zoom.
Yeah, so let's look, does Tuesday work for folks? Why don't we do the Tuesdays in September, Tuesdays in October? Tuesdays in November, but not the week of Thanksgiving. And the Tuesdays in December, but not the week of Christmas or New Year's. Does that work?
You're gonna give us Christmas off?
Yeah.
Want me to include the Tuesday after?
Not Tuesday, November of Election Day.
Yep.
Oh, yeah, the 8th.
November 8th.
November 8th.
Is that gonna limit November?
Yeah, it's only 2 Tuesdays in November, right?
Well, sometimes I can make Thursdays, I just switch around.
Well, let's
If I
see.
have enough notice, I can do Thursday.
15th of November.
Let's see what we can do with Tuesdays, and if we
Okay.
find out that we don't have much of Tuesdays, we know we've got a Thursday as a backup.
Okay, we'll do.
Enough notice, but don't put out any Thursdays yet. Just Tuesdays. So you have a month of August off. Because we couldn't get enough people.
Maybe I'll go.
Jesus, I haven't played golf in 2 years.
Maybe I'll go to the CSG and Manchester, New Hampshire.
Yeah, that would work.
That's not a long trip,
No, it's not.
especially for you. You
It's
could,
an hour and a half, and then 2 hours. Anything else before we finish up and go off of YouTube? Thank you, folks, and we'll